Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Steps podcast. I'm Lou, and I am delighted to be hosting this podcast. This is a space where we share our experiences and reflections of entering into the Steps process. Steps, if you don't know, is a 12-week journey towards freedom, which is based on the well-known 12-step process, and this one is centered on the Christian faith. We often assume that 12-step programs are only for people with obvious addictions such as drugs and alcohol, but here we reveal how using these 12 steps can bring about profound hope and change at a personal level, no matter what addiction, behaviour or thought pattern is holding us back. Every episode, we share and reflect on the raw and unfiltered personal journeys of three participants, Jamie, Lars and me, Lou. We share how we began, grew and are still very much growing in this journey towards inner peace and freedom. In this episode, we are talking about step 6. We were entirely ready to have God remove all these defects of character. So Jamie, let's start with you. How did you feel at the start of step 6?
I don't think I was entirely ready, if I'm honest. I think when I seriously began to think this is the beginning of the end of over-responsibility, and I really considered what surrender would mean of over-responsibility, I think I felt really vulnerable and still feel at times really vulnerable. I think step 6 is this amazing invitation to life and a different kind of life. But I definitely thought, wow, this is initially really painful. And if I'm honest, I feel a lot safer being overly responsible. I wrote this sort of note when I was doing the course. I said, in order to feel safe, I often see myself at the center of the universe, fully responsible for keeping myself safe. And as crazy as that is, and as destructive as that is, somehow I felt safer with me being at the center.
I guess that's what you'd known for a long time. That's what you'd kind of lived by.
Absolutely. And this over-responsibility was entwined in so many different places. So yeah, it was really my default position.
Yeah, I felt similarly, actually. I felt like even though I knew the behaviours around fear of rejection, so lots of people pleasing and saying yes when I meant no, and kind of boundaries that weren't always that healthy, even though I knew it wasn't great, I was actually quite scared about giving all those behaviours associated with that over, because I didn't know what was going to come in its place. I didn't know how I was going to feel. I didn't know to what extent God was going to come through for me. So kind of on the face of it, I was like, oh yeah, I want to get rid of these character defects. But actually the behaviors were quite helpful because they helped me feel safe, because when I people pleased, someone would be happy with me, and that kind of eased the kind of inner anxiety that I felt. So the idea of kind of giving that up and being ready was actually quite a difficult one for me. Lars, how about you? How did you feel at the start of step 6?
Well, I actually don't fully recall how I felt first time I went through the steps process. But I do have kind of a sense of how I very often feel when I come to this part of the process, which, to be honest, is for me very often the most challenging part. And I guess it's because I'm coming from this experience of having received forgiveness, experienced the grace of God, this sense of lightness, everything is forgiven. And there is this moment where everything is well, everything is good. And then the process helps me. It doesn't feel like a help to me often, but it does help me to then, in a way, say, no, we need to go a step deeper with this. And as we go a step deeper with it, I realize exactly what you guys have expressed so well. That, oh, there's a lot of this sitting in me still. It's kind of, it's in my bones, it's in my memory, it's kind of everywhere I look. And I very often then become a bit overwhelmed with how easily I then can go back to my default way of reacting, responding, whatever it is I'm working on, really. So, so typically I have a bit of a dip when I come to this part of the process, which is one side of me. The other side of me, which is a more, you could say, a philosophical side of me, always find joy in step 6 and 7, because I do find them to be really intriguing, mystic in a way, in a very positive way. And I feel like these are steps that I will never be fully finished with. I'm still at them, and I have a sense that I will never fully leave them.
The perfectionist in me finds that bit really hard, because I want to be able to finish it off, tick it off, and say that I've done it and move on to step 8, and quite truthfully never really go back again. But I definitely relate to that kind of, it's never fully done, you know. It's a day by day thing, isn't it?
I totally sympathize with what you're saying, and I think probably most would feel like you with this. But it is, as you say, isn't it? It's probably more and more discovering that there is life in the process, there is freedom in the process, and maybe in many ways, when we are more matured in the journey, in this steps journey, where we are moving around, is maybe particular around these 2 steps, because they're very much about our willingness to surrender and not being in control. And that probably will be an everyday thing to a degree, as long as we are here.
Yeah. It kind of reminds me back at step 3, you know, the step of surrender. It's, you know, in some ways at step 3, for me, it felt kind of, okay, well, I can surrender. But actually then being at step 6, it's like, oh, I really actually have to surrender, or I really want to have to surrender. But it's like almost like when the rubber hits the road, if you know that phrase, kind of, oh, this really means change at some level, which, yes, definitely brought about freedom, but it's quite it's quite ouchy, isn't it? Coming face to face with the character defects that have kind of been helping us to a point, to then have to be like, no, I'm just gonna, or God help me to let that go, because it's hard when they've been part of, you know, they were part of my story for so long, still are part of my story.
And I think it's the gift of awareness as well, isn't it? You go at step 1 and I say, oh, I'm over responsible, I'm over functioning, but I'm not really aware of where it is. I'm just aware I don't like it. I'm aware that it's strange to apologize when I've done nothing wrong. And it's strange to take responsibility for the emotional temperature in every room or walk on eggshells. But in the process, I became aware of, oh, it's there. Oh, it's there. And that's a real gift as well, to be able to see what you couldn't see before, and to see how it affected me, how it affected my relationship with God and other people. That's a real gift. And I was thinking as well, like Lars, you said about the kind of mystical side of it. It's the slow birthing of something new. I think that's a really interesting part as well, because I've done the process a few times, and yeah, step 3, I might have said I'm surrendering. I wasn't, not really, because I didn't want to let it go. But it was the slow birthing of something new in my will, so that not all at once, but I observed a genuine growing desire for something, so that surrender then looked like something, well, I actually want this. I really, really want it. And I really want this gift of inner serenity. I want to accept the things I can't change. And wow, there's courage as well to do the things that I've been invited to do, and a real excitement of thinking, wow, while I'm not accepting, while I'm not surrendering, while I'm not living in serenity, I've got no focus on the things that I could be courageous about. And I found that, well, something was growing, developing slowly, that that actually I wasn't really in control of. It was being birthed inside of me.
I totally recognize what you're saying, Jamie, and both the awareness um, and also, but also this. At least in my experience, this is the time in the process where we actually do start to change some of the behaviors. As you say, we become aware, and then very often this is around this place that we start to feel our way in small changes of behavior. And one of the things that we often, in my experience, then certainly also need to somehow relate to is, oh, this is actually affecting not only me, but it's also affecting the people around me. Because we are so locked into a way of being with other people. And it's all very connected. Their behavior is very much connected to my behavior. No man is an island, as we know. So when I start to change my behavior in the room or in the circle of friends or in the family, wherever I am, or with my spouse even, then the boat starts to rock a little bit, because it means that other people start to reflect on what's going on here. If you're changing, then what about me? What's happening with me? They may not be thinking that deliberately, but that is really what's going on, I believe. And sometimes that creates oh, this is real stuff. And in my history, I have some people who actually around this part chose to bail out of the process, not because they didn't like what was going on in their own lives, but because they feared what would happen with some of the people in their lives if they actually went all the way and experienced full freedom from what they were working on. So that's always been a bit of a tragedy to me when that has happened, to be honest, because I do think that's a bad choice. But I do understand what they were saying about the dynamics of what happens when we start to change. So it's almost like up to step 5, it's very much between me and myself and me and God. It's still between the three of us in step 6 and 7, but in reality, people around us often start to slightly feel the change, and that does add a complexity, at least in my experience.
Yeah, I have family members who haven't done steps before, and I definitely found that I don't think it was necessarily a bad thing, but I definitely recognized that I was on a particular journey that others went on, and then that, I guess when I was in the midst of it, that became quite difficult to know how to communicate. And I think, as Jamie was saying, you know, as you go on through the steps, or as I went on through the steps, I could see more and more behaviors where it was kind of related to this fear of rejection that I was just not aware of before. And I love what someone said to me once. They said awareness before change, and it's as we become aware of things, then we can change them. And I felt like step 6 was an opportunity to kind of gain more awareness in that way. And I don't know about either of you, but when it came to thinking about character defects, I got a bit stuck at first. I didn't really know kind of, I think I went in my mind to, oh, I want to be able to tick this box and get through this step. So I need to know what my character defects were, but it didn't feel really clear cut to me. And then it came back to me finding that actually it's quite hard to, the process felt a bit messy in some ways because it wasn't so clear cut. What was your experience of that? Was it quite easy for you guys to know what your character defects were?
I mean, I worked on pride for years, which was the actual character defect. So that made it quite easy for me in that regard. But as I've been working on other things, I totally recognize what you are saying, Lou, and that's what I hear from many of the people that I've been journeying with, that it's not always that easy to say it's this exact character defect. And to be honest, as I've been in the process for a while, I'm not sure it matters that much any longer, whether I'm ready, I'm able to find just the right one. I think it's more the realization that what goes on is not a representation of the true me or the essential me. And in a way, that is what I'm handing over, that is what I'm giving over. And I'm asking God to replace that with what he has really made me for. And sometimes that's helpful, I have found, to do that little exercise as a replacement exercise when I haven't been able to fully say, is it this or is it that? Also because things seems to kind of meld into one another, don't they? So fear, pride, being deceitful, all of those things that really go together. It feels like one character defect leads to the next one. It's really a bad family to be part of. Yeah. So sometimes it's been helpful just to say, God, take it all. That rotten stuff, which really hasn't been helpful at all in my life. Yeah.
I guess there's a line though, isn't there? Because I could see myself doing that to avoid thinking too much about what they are and avoid taking responsibility. So it's also getting a balance of, you want to I want to investigate what these defects of character might be, but not dwelling on it too much and not kind of going down too much of a rabbit hole of trying to think of every single behavior and example of when I've been kind of greedy or fearful or angry, or over time. So it's a balancing act.
Oh, it totally is. And I think it's about finding not a whole book of examples, but more, what are the 3 or 4 primary examples of this behavior? And most of us would know exactly what they are. And then we know those are the behaviors that I need to work on. And that's where I need to make my plan for change and do the things that is suggested in the step in terms of doing that in a very timely manner, to do it in a very diligent manner, and so on and so forth. And that needs to be on our table. That needs to be our responsibility on the one hand. But on the other hand, I also just really believe that when it comes to the thing deep down in us that seems to source this unhelpful behavior, that's where we do have to kind of admit we are powerless when it comes to that source. We can't drown it out. We do need help from God to do that, to see real transformation in our lives.
So where, you've kind of talked about it a bit, but where would you say the hope is in step 6?
For me, some of the encouragement was where I would suddenly find myself with a new measure of courage. I would suddenly find myself speaking in a new way. I would suddenly find myself being clear and kind and not just nice. I would find these new kind of capacities to communicate springing up. And I remember suddenly seeing them and thinking, wow, where did that come from? That's the real hope. But what's really interesting, alongside it is some discomfort, because there's old mechanisms that would say, oh, I think when you spoke up, you said the wrong thing, or I think you said it in the wrong way. Those same, I guess, temptations to ruminate about the new freedom are still there. And I think the hope is to be really kind. I think the kinder I can be to myself in the process, and understanding that as new freedom grows and new expressions grow, that's not always super comfortable. And you kind of wish it would be this magical moment where the old mechanisms would just magically disappear, and then you would just be this person who's not responsible, not over functioning, not walking on eggshells, and you would just wake up and go, oh, brand new me. But it's an interesting thing to be a human, isn't it? And I found that really helpful in the process, the permission to be human, that I am a mixture between empathy, compassion, kindness, and love and creativity. And wow, I'm also fearful, and I also sometimes want to overfunction, and I also sometimes want to be really in control, and I also feel really unsafe, and I also want to go on adventures and be courageous and take risk, and to embrace humanity as well, to know that God embraces all that I am, still is such a liberating and hope-filled thought.
I totally agree with that. And I would put it like this, that hope is in connection. And God is in the mess. And we are reaching out for God in these steps 6 and 7 in a particular way for help. But I would also say, I am also in the mess. And so many other people are in the mess. It's a good place to meet other people. We have a tendency to be our real selves when we dare to admit it's quite messy around me and even within me. But I'm willing to be on a journey, and would you help me be on that journey? I have found that's where I find the best community in my life. So in the midst of the pain of the mess, I have also learned to appreciate what happens when I dare to face it, be honest about it, and reach out both to God and to others, and even to myself, allowing myself to be a fragile, messy little person. That is not a bad place to be.
Yeah, that makes complete sense. I think also for me, it's always good to do step 6 off the back of step 5, because I'm doing it from a place of knowing that I am forgiven and accepted and loved. And so I don't need to be anything other than myself, my messy self, like you were saying, Lars. And I love that the emphasis on this step is that God removes the defects of character. It's not on me to do it. But I'm in the process, that's the part I'm playing. I'm engaging in the process, but actually this is God's job, not mine. And I'm showing up and doing what I can, but he does the rest. And so that, I think, is where the hope comes for me at step 6. I'm leaning back into God's power and God's love and his provision rather than my own, which is always good to remember. So it was really good to talk about step 6. Next time we're going to be talking step 7, which is often, well, it's closely linked, and that is where we humbly asked him to remove our shortcomings. So I'm looking forward to that. Lars, why don't you share this serenity prayer as we close?
Very happy to. God, grant us serenity to accept the things we cannot change, courage to change the things we can, and wisdom to know the difference. Amen.